So, quick disclaimer before we get into the video. This ended up being a lot longer than I originally expected. Please use the key stamps in the description below so you can navigate to the section of the video that you want to hear about and don't want to tune into the entire thing because it is a very long video. So, definitely use the key stamps. How's it going, Goonies? I am Thought Patrol, and I figured I would go ahead and make this video instructing some of you newbies on how to play Battle for Middle-earth 2, since you're all probably new to the game. I can't imagine why else you clicked on this video. I won't waste any of your time talking about hotkeys or practical methods for improvement or any of the, other fine-tuned, control-based elements of the game, as there are many other excellent YouTubers out there. Zaid Plays and Destroyer both do excellent videos on both of those topics that I will link in this video. Now, I figure what I will spend some time doing is talking a little bit more generally, as well as going into the specifics on what your goals are, depending on what your play style is, as well as what faction you're playing and what resources and options that faction does or does not have available to it in order to accomplish its goals in the game. And also, I think, a little bit of an understanding of what those goals are and what they should look like. I'm going to go ahead and start with just a basic, small piece of advice that applies for every faction. And then, as the video gets into its later marks, I will speak more specifically on a few of the factions that I personally know a little better than the rest. Although, understand that some of these general rules apply across multiple factions, especially if they happen to be in the same category of good or evil. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. If you want to skip ahead to different sections, the timestamps are below in the description. So this first piece of advice is generally applicable to all factions. Right here at the beginning, when the loading bar hits 100%, we see this green screen. If you use the hotkey to select builders, which is the B button, you can actually select your builders if you're spamming it just a few seconds before the game even fully loads and you see the display. If you've memorized what your hotkeys are for building your resource buildings or your barracks, you will basically be able to produce these things at the fastest conceivable speed in-game, which is always just a good thing and gives you a bonus start up, especially if you're beating your opponent by, however many frames or seconds that it's taking them to get their building started. So that's the first thing, is making use of that early select on the builders. So I want to talk a little bit about how to play offensively with a slower faction, and the fact of the matter is, there are some very slow factions in the game, none of them physically slower than the Dwarves. However, Mordor and Men are also two factions that are pretty radically outpaced by their peers. So, one of the things that you can do to ensure a more effective offensive move early on in the game is to go with the build order I talked about earlier, where you opt for a little more of an early barracks into early troops. Now, in this particular case, in this game that I was playing against a hard AI, and with Dwarves, a classic offensive strat that can work very well, especially in 1v1, as well as in teams, if you're careful enough, is to place a forward mine very early in the game to utilize it as a tool for overcoming the slow movement speed of the Dwarves. So in this game, I start right off with a mine. Right next to the mine, I build a dwarf barracks, and I make sure that the barracks, a good rule with the barracks is to always have it facing your fortress, no matter what angle you're building it at, and to usually build it behind the fortress, so that if the enemy attempts an early rush or aggression, they have to contend with the archery tower, in this case the axe tower from the fort that you're at. So what I do here in this game is I identify that I'm close to a inn. Fantastic thing. An inn, or actually it's a marketplace. Sorry, not an inn, it's a marketplace. Marketplace is a fantastic thing. It produces usually about double what 100% mine would be. So I know where the enemy faction base is based on the map display, and so I'm building this mine down here in a location where I'll be close enough to start sending in troops, but, far away enough that they won't immediately know where my mine is. And because as soon as they discover my mine, I need to make a conscious effort to you know, maximize its use before they discover it or until the occasion that they discover it, so I can destroy as many farms or as many buildings as they can. So here they've sent in an orc rush because it's Mordor. They're trying to rush me down early on in the game. However, that orc rush, I'm not even worried about it because I know that the fortress is going to wipe them out before they really can do any real damage, and it's also a single unit. So a single unit of orcs stands absolutely no chance of doing any damage or destroying any buildings that are within range of the fortress. So, and now I'm able to just walk my... So you can see, like, even though, like, I didn't use the mine there, by getting the build out early, I was still able to walk myself down and get my dwarven units into a position to take the first building of the game and capture that slaughterhouse. Now, see, as soon as you capture it, you don't want to get tied up with messing around with other troops. So immediately, I mobilize myself onto another slaughterhouse. And here I'm going to display another strategy that all factions can benefit from. This is called clumping. So I walk my unit back behind the slaughterhouse for two reasons. One, it gets me away from the fort, it gets me away from those archers and makes it harder for them to draw a bead on my unit there, thus allowing them to just kind of focus on you know, attacking the slaughterhouse without getting harassed. And two, the other thing that this does for me is this allows me to basically do a technique where, as you can see, the unit operates in a square. There's kind of a square of dwarves. When you get all of them around the building real close together like that, it allows their attack speed not only to come more rapidly, but it also allows more of them to actually get their hands on the building, whereas if you just simply right-click and they regularly attack it, they'll spread around the building. However, not all of the, you know, members of the unit will be able to lay hands on the building. So, in the meanwhile, I've got another mine going to keep the enemy guessing as far as where these dwarves are coming from. And I'm going to go after and take another slaughterhouse. Now, at this point in the game, I've already managed to be successful. I've already succeeded in my goals as playing aggressive. Why? Well, because I started the initiative. I struck the first blow, and I struck it well, because although it's just a single slaughterhouse, these slaughterhouses impact how many units can be on the field, and they also impact how much money my enemy is getting. So let's say the enemy's planning on trying to camp a little bit, maybe build up for some attack trolls, which is, of course, a Mordor classic. Well, by getting after him this early in the game and just coming after his stuff like this, I can deny him the ability to really do that. And then by investing in the legendary dwarf hero Glowin, I am able to get him after their buildings as well, start gaining him some levels, so he can become a real threat later in the game, as well as early in it, not only to the troops, but especially to the buildings. Glowin is a siege demolition master. His ability demolition allows him to pretty much one-shot most buildings in the game outside of the fortress. And then once he gets Earth Shatter at level 10, he's pretty much a nuclear bomb that can take out like an entire army. So I won't go into any further detail in this match. Just know that as far as creating early aggression with a slow faction, it is all about positioning. And if you can't utilize mines like the dwarves, something that men and Mordor actually both can still make use of is really good positioning and just staying out of the sight, the line of sight of their opponent until the time is right, and then committing to destroying typically an outlying farm, if not two. And also divide and conquer. Notice how I'm attacking him from multiple angles here, from multiple mines. And in the meantime, right, my base is untouched, allowing me to build troops, allowing me to expand outward and make more mines for the purpose of production, knowing that they'll be safe in this case because, you know, I'm against one opponent, and my one opponent has his hands full fending off my assault. And, you know, at the end of the day, and here we are glowing, completely just stifling this this troll cage before it can even fully get constructed. It's already like at a third of its health. So yeah, I mean, this is just a very good early game aggressive strat for a faction that is very slow and pretty notorious for usually not doing so hot as far as the you know, speed factor, speed category goes. So that's a quick little bit on the early game when it comes to the dwarves. Okay, so by mid-game, if your aggression has gone well, your opponent is going to be kind of lashing out at all of the different things. They're going to be a little bit divided. So what I like to do if your builder has still gone unkilled is build a barracks, or in this case, a siege works, or whatever building would be responsible for constructing your best siege unit, and start sending siege attacks against your opponent. In the case of the Dwarves, the Demolisher is very effective at this. If you have access to mines, whether you're Goblins or Dwarves, building more mines in a spread around your opponent's base can really frustrate them, because they send out like their army and it's like, oh, well, here's a mine that we can focus on and kill. But as long as more units are pouring out of the mine, they can't really do anything to destroy it. In the meantime, the builder can just keep building more and more mines around them, while the second one can build mines for maximal income back near the base and keep the generation of income going. Now notice I don't have any full upgrades yet, and we're already like well into, a good solid 11 minutes into the game. It doesn't matter though, because the pressure that I'm exuding on the enemy is so great that, he doesn't have time to upgrade, and frankly, I don't need to upgrade. I've got my hero gaining levels and gaining strong abilities. My opponent is diversifying his units. He's managed to stay alive because there's a whole wing of his resources, I imagine, I haven't quite yet gotten my hands on up in that top left corner. However, this doesn't matter, and in the meantime, he knows that he needs to lash out and try and get some offense against me going. However, he can't really do it, because my base, from all that he can tell, is, very, very tightly knit. The stuff is very close. I went ahead at this point in the game and got Gimli, so at this stage of the game, if you've got enough income, you want to escalate and start moving to the late game as quick as possible. Now, this can be demonstrated either by a big hero purchase. Gimli is one of the strongest heroes in the game, and is certainly the most powerful dwarven hero, so buying Gimli is a very good call. He's great for clearing out enemy troops, but on top of that, he's also fantastic for sieging and destroying enemy buildings. And you just want to keep this, not the spam necessarily, but you want to keep the unit rush coming, and you want to move up the tier list towards units that are going to be better at sieging, so that you can just continue to pressure. At this point, you also want to really make it a point to destroy, if they've got any specialized units, right? Like these trolls are trouble for me, because I know that if they hit my demolishers, they'll cause aerial knockback, which will completely interrupt the animation that the demolishers have to get out in order to, So I barely didn't destroy that troll cage there. But yeah, the point being, like, when you see specialized buildings, really any enemy troop production buildings, you want to have your troops target that as quickly as possible. Second biggest priority in the entire game, I would say, alongside taking out, of course, resource buildings. But at this point in the game, we're a little later on, we're trying to finish it, so we want to hamstring and handicap any unit development that our enemy has as much as possible. And in this case, that means taking out their... all of their unit production buildings as fast as we can. Now, by late game, hopefully the beachhead is well underway. This is finally the point in the game where you're going to be able to get some of those upgrades for your units, because, things have just escalated into that direction. By now, you should have a full-blown siege, establishment near the fort, and you should have a whole bunch of barracks nearby as well. The pressure at this point has mounted to a threshold that just can't really be ignored by your opponent. And of course, another advantage that is going on from all of this activity is that your ability timer is just shooting up through the roof, and you're able to unlock some of those higher tier abilities, which, especially in the case of the Dwarves, ability like Barrage, which is just a meteor strike, where meteors rain down on a select area, can do a lot of building destruction. It can do a lot of damage to your opponents. If you've been playing with a hero consistently, like I've been playing this game with Glowin, and you're catching them up on levels, especially if that hero is good at destroying buildings, well, that hero is going to be getting their level 10, their late game, abilities, and those abilities can be devastating, especially, as I said earlier with Glowin, the ability to just actually smash an entire army with a single move, the Earth Shatter, is devastating. And I'm not quite there yet, but at level 7, he is still a serious threat, both to armies as well as to buildings. And at this point, I'm just trying to I'm bringing in my late-game archers, the Men of Dale, to take out units. I'm using my spearmen to prioritize the trolls so that I can kind of clear the way for my demolishers to come in. And that's going to be, this is a unique setup to Dwarves, but it mirrors something that all factions will have to do whenever they're doing a proper siege and an offensive gameplay strat, which is basically you need to clear the way for your siege weapons to be able to get in there and do their job. So in this case, for me, that means prioritizing the trolls so that I can get my Demolisher in there to focus on their fortress. Of course, once the fortress goes down, this is where you really need to, like, you know, go for the throat, because they are now in an incredibly vulnerable spot where they don't have access to their abilities. If you've been executing the strategy of aggression properly throughout the game, and you know, the time has come to kind of close in and seal the deal in a manner of speaking, which is how the slower factions really work. You know, Mordor, Dwarves, Men of the West, they all, you know, kind of operate on this principle of kind of the hand is slowly closing around the throat. You know, this whole game started off with just a few farms, and then it just kind of tightened until now here we are in this position where, you know, we're about to take their fort. They don't really have any resources. They don't really have much of an army left that can contend, and they don't have any abilities. So now that I find myself in this fantastic position where I've basically, like, got them exactly where I want them, it's time to start going to work on any buildings that can produce enemy units that, you know, that are left, right? So in this case, the Tavern, the Siege Works, and the Orc Pit. Because as soon as these 3 buildings are down, the game's over. Now, sometimes, this is an AI, right? So obviously a little less on the creative side, but usually a human player at this point in time will try to run off and build a secret camp somewhere, or like try to build a second base, or like try to gather themselves, delay the game. In a single-player game, what my strategy in that case typically is to build my fastest unit and then go hunt them down. But in a multiplayer game with multiple allies, almost always you'll have at least one ally who has very good vision. And by this point, you guys have such good control of the map. All you need to do is move in, build more farms, and hunt them down and destroy that last building and take your win. And that is how you play aggression with a slow faction, in this case, the Dwarves being that slow faction. Okay, so now that we've talked about the slower factions, we're going to go ahead and go into some discussion on the fast factions, and I'm going to show you a game here of me playing Goblins. So, especially with the factions that are custom built to rush down, or to Zerg rush, or otherwise be really aggressive, obviously you are going to start with the exact same as you would with a slow faction. You know, speed is of the utmost importance, so you're going to go with your farm first and then right into your barracks. Now, the difference with a fast faction, and, you know, I'm going to try and show to my best of my ability just how terrifying the Goblins are, is you just really want to maximize on speed and just out, you know, rushing your opponent at every conceivable turn, at every possible position that you can, because, you know, speed is one of your greatest advantages, and especially in the case of the Goblins, it often happens that defense is not a strong suit, which is very true of the Goblins. Their archers are very weak. They have a huge weakness when it comes to trying to ward off against air-based opposition. And so it's in the Goblins' best interest to simply take out their opponent, take them out of commission, before the game can even get on that long. So in this case, I'm going to kind of mimic what I did with the Dwarves and place a forward mine. In the case of the Dwarves, it was to, you know, make sure that they could utilize aggression at all. You know, for the Dwarves, the mine is a lifeline for them. For Goblins, they don't need the mine. They don't need the mine. It just happens to be a great option for them. So in this case, I'm pretty confident of my strategy, and I'm opting immediately into a fissure as soon as I get my first group of Goblins in. Now, this is only like about a minute into the game, really, and maybe a minute and 30 seconds, so I'm pretty confident in myself that I have the drop on my position. Of course, I know the map, and this is a 1v1 map, so I have an idea of where my opponent is. I opt for a level 1 ability that enables aggression, which in this case is War Chant. In the case of allied factions, this would be Rallying Cry. Now, notice how I immediately switched the Goblins into an aggressive stance. I clicked on that icon right next to their Poison Blade ability, and all units have this, and I switched it to the double-crossed blades. The hotkey for this is D, and immediately this makes their health a little lighter, but it also makes it so that they have more aggression. I activate Poison Blades to do additional damage to the building, and we just take that farm out immediately. And right there, just about 2 minutes into the game, we already have a pretty serious advantage and a pretty serious amount of aggressive rush going on against our opponent. who is in serious trouble if they can't get some archers out and deal with this quickly. Now, it looks like they went for swordsmen. This is a common strategy. So what I like to do whenever I see that my unit has been chewed down this much is just use the speed of the goblins to their advantage, to just outrun the elves. And the elves are no slow faction, but goblins are truly just on another level. So right here, I try to outmaneuver them and have my goblins run back, but I stop microing them for a second to go ahead and have my other goblins focus on this building that the elves are trying to build. Something else that I am doing a lot here that I encourage all players to do is once you know that your unit or rush-down aggressive unit has accomplished their mission, right? Well, what is their mission? Every time you buy one of these guys, you want them to at least get that much that you spent on them back. And an easy way to measure this is how much damage did they do? How much damage in terms of money did they do? So if one of these little 75 resource goblin units can take out a single farm, they've done their job. They've done their job. They've already earned more than their weight in value by taking out one of the farms. However, if you can make them do even more by distracting the enemy units by having them run around like this, you know, while you mobilize another group, you know, that's even better. So, and this is exactly where the aggression can just really get out of hand for your opponent. Is they're chasing down the goblins. They're trying to, like, find out what's going on. And in the meantime, I've got a cave troll coming after them. I've got these, you know, little goblins running around, and their units are trying to chase them down, these slow Mifflin sentries who can very easily kill the goblins, but they just can't catch them. They just can't catch them. They're not fast enough. Meanwhile, my rush is just progressing exactly according to plan. I'm not even bothering with a hero. I'm going straight into the big buy for siege units, like the cave troll, and I'm making sure to go back to my base every once in a while to make more mines so that my economy keeps going. In the meantime, I switch the cave troll over to boulder attack so that he's out of range of the arrow towers of the elves. I go ahead and use my war cry. And meanwhile, these goblins over here are about to take out this tree while the elves are trying to deal with it. This is what you call a complete rushdown right here. This elf hard AI has no idea what is hitting him. He literally can't even react to it. And that's really what it's about, is just moving faster than your opponent. Playing a fast team or a team that's meant for aggression early on in the game, like Goblins, and Goblins are the second best faction in the game for this reason, is all about just setting as many fires as possible so that your opponent can't conceivably put them out all at once. So there we go, we've got the barracks down. Now the elf player's in a horrible spot. They've only got that Mifflin sentry group, I'm fairly confident, and this allows me to go ahead and start attacking the main base now that the barracks is cleared and that there are no enemy units really in the way to stop me. And now that my cave troll doesn't quite have the range of the mountain giant, so he's not safe from the fortress attacking them like this. But I move in my goblin troop while the arrow is focused on the troll. I bring in my second troll and have him manually attack, and then I have the first troll run out of range of the tower so that the fortress AI then starts targeting my goblin troops. Now I have both the trolls run in. The trolls have some of the highest damage in the game. And at this point, I'm not even really concerned about the fort. I'm just looking around for any builders, any spare barracks that might be built. It looks like the AI tried to rush a desperate last base race kind of attack on my base to absolutely no avail, and I didn't even have to look or pay attention to my troops at that base, and they were able to take it down. So that right there is what you call a very effective rush, right? And I only really had to cover the late game there because that's the fact of the matter. When a rush is executed well, when you keep your opponent guessing and you micro well enough with just a few units, you know, I was able to make 75 resources, 75 gold, go a long way, and that game was only 6 minutes and 4 seconds before it was over. Sure, my KDA wasn't great, but on this screen you want to pay attention to where the green numbers and letters are, because that's where it really counts, and that will show where you were really doing well in the game. But yeah, so that's how you play an aggressive, fast rushdown approach in the game using a faction like Goblins, and this approach can also be utilized, believe it or not, by other factions such as Isengard and even the Elves, as well as, to a lesser extent, Mordor, depending on how you play them. So we've done a whole lot of talking about how to do aggression, because the fact of the matter is, aggression is one of the best conceivable strategies that can really be used in Battle for Middle-earth 2 to seize the advantage early on and to put your opponent into a tough spot. However, defense is another option that is just as important, especially in a situation where you're playing teams or playing an opponent that you know for a fact is faster than you. So we just saw Goblins destroy Elves. Now I'm going to play Elves and show you how defense can work well as well. So we're going to start right out, and we're going to actually use what would normally be an aggressive start. But I only do this because I know that I'm playing against a Goblin player in a one-on-one, and I know that the Goblin player is faster than me. I know how fast their rush can come. So I'm trying to build a barracks as quickly as possible so I can get some archers out, because while those Goblin warriors are very good at destroying the trees if they're not being targeted, as long as I have archers out to target and focus down those Goblin warriors, they're very light armor, they die very quick to elven arrows. Notice how I'm also building my trees, or my resource buildings in this case, very close to my fortress, so that any early rush that comes at me has to contend with the archer tower, or the arrow tower, from the fortress. This kind of build really stifles any early aggression from the goblins and puts them in a position where they have to either sacrifice their unit entirely, or they have to stand back at a distance, and they can't really resume their rush while I am able to generate resources. So at this point, I already have a group of archers coming out. Now, usually to do defense well, you have to have a faction that has good defensive attributes. So factions like Elves, Men of the West, definitely. And actually, I would also say, though to a lesser extent, Dwarves. Really, all of the good factions have some fantastic defensive capabilities. On the evil side, Isengard would probably be one of the better defensive factions. Mordor also has some great defensive options. Goblins really are not particularly good, I would say, when it comes to defense. So what I'm doing here is I'm sending in a very early creep. I'm using the creep defensively here so I can generate some resources. But I'm building exclusively archers, because I know that the elven archers easily trounce any of the early game options or rush options that the goblins have. So here is kind of a risky play, but you can make it work. What I'm doing here is I'm using the builder to aggro the cave troll, and I'm moving him around, kind of playing tag with the cave troll, so that my archers, who are in aggressive stance, will automatically target him and start shooting him down, and hopefully kill him before he kills my builder, thus allowing them to then take down the lair and creep effectively. Now, the reason I'm going for this lair specifically is somewhat of an aggressive option, but it's also, I'm using it kind of to boost myself economically so that I can get some villagers out and have them kind of come up the side and then go attack the goblins on the side flank while I can continue to creep here. But notice how I'm not going for any of the enemy buildings yet. I'm not. I'm focusing on creeping. I want to get my creeps ready. I want to get my money going so that I can go ahead and start developing a good army. And because that's the #1 goal of the defensive player, or maybe a more developmental player, is that you're trying to build up an army. So a little bit of failure on the micro there. I'm going to go ahead and have this builder come up, and I was going to save up for Erigian Forge there, but I decided not to. I figured it makes more sense to go ahead and... Well, actually, I guess I did. So if the creeping is going well, I'm going to go ahead and grab that massive amount of resources from the lair there, and I'm going to go ahead and build the forge so I can start getting my upgraded Silverthorn arrows out, as well as the upgraded armor and the blades. Although right now, we're focusing on the arrows, which is going to be a pretty consistent theme in a defensive build, is the simple fact that, like, archers, or factions that have good archers, that are accessible very early on in the game, or have very good Tier 1 archers, like the Elves, who have the best Tier 1 archers, usually do a better job defending. Also, in terms of ability, I chose for this one the Farsight, so that I can see both enemies that might be rushing me early, but in this case I'm also using it to creep, so I can give my archers just that absolute maximum reach of range. So here we go, we've got a Goblin Rush, and it looks like they decided to send in 4. Now the first thing that, you know, an enemy player who's trying to be aggressive will think whenever they see a group of archers like that, and especially when they outnumber them, is, hey, like, this is perfect, we can completely, you know, wipe this guy out. You know, and in this case, I immediately have my archers retreat back to the base, because the fact of the matter is, the goblins can wipe them out. The archers kill the goblins very easily, but usually only one at a time. Now, the goblins have the numerical advantage here, but the first thing that you want to do in a defense early on like this is move back to the base, get that extra support from the fortress, so that you can take out the Goblin Rush before it takes out your entire army. Meanwhile, I'm going to be creeping in the bottom of the map with my other archer unit to get a little bit more gold, a little bit more resources. And, you know, these villagers might seem like they are being used offensively. But in fact, I can guarantee you that they're being used in a defensive manner. Sometimes, well, first off, you know, in an RTS, you can never play only defensive all the time. And the sooner you mount some kind of offense against them, the better. For two reasons. One, it will make them, you want to bait them into a position where they think that you're about to do a serious rushdown or a serious committal offense. But for the second reason for this is the offense, especially even if it's just minor, a few farms here or there, buys you time, right? It makes your opponents think on the defensive for a second. And if you can get them to think on the defensive just for a little bit, you can really cause them to doubt their position. You can cause them to doubt like their objective with the base, and you can buy yourself some time, which is what these cheap little peasants are going to do. They also are pretty good at destroying buildings, so I'm going to go ahead and destroy this goblin cave. Now they won't be able to produce any more goblins, and their #1 unit for the rushdown is not going to come squeezing. Meanwhile, back at the base, it's a little rough. That rushdown took out most of my units because I wasn't microing them, which is the biggest thing that you need to be ready to do on defense is pay close attention to the base, pay close attention to the units that are near the base. So 2 cave trolls come in because I, you know, was not prepared and I didn't build up quite a big enough army. And so I'm put into a position where I have to kind of, you know, delay. I kind of have to, I might have to sacrifice a barracks. So what do I do, since I can't do anything with the units at the base, and I've pretty much lost all of them? I trust the fortress to take out the cave trolls, and I keep right on managing my troops over here. I keep right on poking them, doing what damage I can to their farm, in an effort to distract them. Now, we've got all these spiders in this cave troll. Now, these peasants stand absolutely no chance of, you know, taking these guys out. They stand no chance against the cave troll, though maybe these archers might take them out. But it doesn't matter, because in the meantime, I can focus on bolstering the economy, I can focus on getting my defenses up, and building up an army that will be capable of defending the fort, and eventually capable of taking some ground. Because all that's going on here, I go ahead with the level 10 ability Green Wood, because it gives double armor to the Elves. The whole aim of the game here is to buy yourself enough time to where you can get an army that can start moving against your opponent. And I'm not doing a spectacular job of it here. You know, I did not micro my Elven archers quite well enough, and I'm newer to the Elven faction. Of the factions that I've shown you so far, they are definitely the faction I'm least familiar with. But, I can tell you right now that with the Elves, unlike the Goblins and the Dwarves, you know, this is not a faction where I just kind of can ignore my units as easily, right? Whereas on aggression, you can kind of almost ignore your troops a little bit while they go in and do the damage. On defense, you got your troops matter a lot. You got to make them count. You got to kind of keep them around a little bit. So right now I'm just trying to rush down to Silverthorn arrows because I realize that I don't have a large army, so my best bet is probably to go ahead and grab that upgrade so that my archers just hit a little bit harder, they're a little more dangerous. I already have the well upgrade so that they have a bonus for attack as well as experience gain. And I'm trying to look to get that enchanted anvil in a little bit also. But I would still regard that early game as successful, if only for the fact that I was able to simultaneously stifle their offense while also using Farsight to learn about their base and build myself up in a position where, come the mid-game, I can start getting upgrades and building up an army that can repel what my opponent is sending at me completely, and also retake some ground. The name of the game early on with a defensive approach is to anticipate that your opponent is faster than you, they will attack before you do, and that you will be ready for that attack, and that you will come out of it victorious with most of your army intact, while the opponent loses the entirety of their aggressive rush, allowing you the opportunity to go on the counteroffensive. This is the entire objective of a defensive build or approach to the early game, and it is entirely contingent on succeeding your first engagement with your opponent. Now, come the mid-game, if you've successfully held off your opponent's rush and have had time to expand and build your defensive economy, the time now comes to go and seize some ground, to go ahead and take opportunity to start regaining some ground and putting the pressure back onto your opponent. So here, now that I've got my elves with their upgrades and a pretty solid economy built up on my side of the map, I can move the elves into a very aggressive position here at the riverhead, knowing that my opponent will probably come by the shortest path, because that's typically how aggressive opponents go, and understanding with my far sight that he has not, in fact, tried to flank me or tried to use any side routes, I go ahead and take a good look at the base and set up this green wood right here in the middle of the map so that I have the double armor, and with my fully upgraded unit, I am able to move right in and take out the cave troll. Now I'm in a very aggressive position where any units that he builds I can potentially take out and otherwise prevent from really getting any aggression going. Now the goblin player is in a very disadvantageous position where he has to defend. And most aggressive players, even if they are playing a faction that normally is good at offense, such as Mordor or Goblins, or maybe even Isengard, who perhaps is the most aggressive of them all, in their own way. All of these factions do not do well when the tables are turned on them. They do not like it when they now have to change their position. Because the fact of the matter is, if they don't have upgrades on their fortress, and they likely don't because all of their money has been spent towards getting, their aggression going early on, they are not prepared to deal with a counter-assault by an upgraded or higher-ranked army, which is precisely what the Goblin player here is now having to deal with from me. Now, of course, in the counterattack, this buys you the space and time to expand wildly, so you might notice that I have Melorn trees everywhere. And the intention of this is to go ahead and start moving towards big purchases for late game, such as the Entmoot here. And I'm going to go ahead and start grabbing the Elves' best siege units, their only siege units, which of course are the Ents. And in the meantime, what am I doing? Well, notice how I'm not focusing on going down and just cleaning out their farm, right? I'm just holding this threatening position smack dab in the middle of the map where the Goblin player can't really get after me. There aren't any units that the Goblin player can send at me at this time. They can send cave trolls, they can send a big rush of spiders, but whatever unit they send, those units are ultimately going to lose, and in the meantime, the Goblin player is still distracted by my peasant rush on the sidelines. Now, at this point in time, I want to go ahead and start moving to, even better and better units, and if I was really wanting to be oppressive in my counter-aggression, what I would be doing is I would actually be setting up the greenwood right outside where the goblin caves are. And maybe I can't destroy the goblin caves with my archers, but you know what I can do is I can kill any unit that comes out of those goblin caves before they even have the chance to get upgrades, such as armor or health. And this is a strategy that is especially effective against goblins, but it works against all factions, right? No matter how rich your opponent is, when units are first developed, when they're first constructed, they don't automatically come out the gate with upgrades. And if you've got a whole group of elves like this chilling right by the caves, well, guess what? Now, not only do you not get the upgrades, but your units will die literally on arrival as they face a barrage of fully upgraded, fully ranked elven Silverthorn arrows. So at this point in the game, again, because my opponent hasn't succeeded in his initial rush, and because I've gradually taken ground back with the elves, I have the threatening position, and I can just keep that position as long as I'm careful, and send in the siege units. Treebeard's here. He's going to go ahead and start sieging the front part of the fort. And these spiderlings come out thinking about going after Treebeard, but then they see all these elven archers there, and they realize that they are utterly helpless, and they cannot approach for fear of dying. I bring in more Ents, and at this point you just ramp up the aggression. In the same way that with an offensive build, you want to go in and clear the area of all buildings and all units that could potentially threaten your siege equipment. In the case of the defensive build, especially when you can siege at a distance, you just want to control space near the fort dominantly in a position that cannot really be ascended or attacked by your opponent. And you just want to maintain that so that your distance long-range siege gear can go ahead and kick in. It would be the exact same strategy if you were playing men, and it would be the exact same strategy if you were playing a faction such as Mordor, actually. It's just that your defended position might be primarily occupied by Haradrim archers, along with maybe some orc archers with fire arrows, and of course a big mob of orcs, while you allow your battering rams or wait for Grond to cruise through if it's a really late game. But you just kind of maintain a beachhead. You know, more or less leave your opponent with this sense that they're surrounded. Meanwhile, over here, I'm just doing a little extra creeping on this Warglare that I didn't bother to get in the earlier part of the game. By this point, I've got all 3 Ents sieging the fortress. You know, I'm off on the sidelines grabbing a little bit more money, but really that's not the most efficient use of those Rangers. I could probably bring the Rangers down here just to make sure that I have an even more oppressive presence against my opponent, but bam, down goes the fortress. And once the fortress is down, you know, the game really kind of becomes the exact same, whether you started defensive or started offensive, right? It's all about rushing down and getting all of their buildings as quickly as possible. Now, at this point in the game, it's late game. I'm able to get my tier 15 special ability, which is to summon the eagles, which now that they no longer are under threat of archer towers, and only these terrible goblin archers can even slightly threaten them, I'll go ahead and have them get summoned and come down to take out the remaining buildings. Since I know I won't be able to build up or save up for any other late-game abilities, I go ahead and use those 5 special ability points to get the rallying call so I can buff up the damage on my troops. And see, the goblins they are attacking, they're doing some damage, admittedly, but it's just too little too soon. This is just a desperate last fight. You know, the archers focus on the cave troll, he's done. The half-trolls, very powerful units, some of the strongest units in the game, especially for the goblins, but unupgraded, they fall to the arrows just as easily as any of the other troops do, to say nothing of these goblin archers. You know, Treebeard and the other Ents, they've been safe this entire time. They've been free to literally have their way with the buildings of the goblins, and even though the goblins have the rubble with the potential to regrow and recover, which is annoying to siege, even eventually that rubble goes down, yielding the victory to the elves with the defensive playstart. So, and it's all about preserving your units at the early part of the game. In order to succeed with the defensive build, it all boils down to 3 things. Anticipate an aggressive rush on your base early on in the game, defend the aggressive rush early on in the game, upgrade your units while retaining as many of your units in every encounter as possible, and then aggressively counterattack, seizing ground and choking off movement from your opponent player until you come all the way up, knocking to their base. This can be augmented with upgrades, this can be augmented with heroes that have leadership abilities, yielding additional armor and damage. And by the time you are knocking on that base, you have a group of elite troops that are so highly ranked and so upgraded that they just don't stand any chance of real opposition from your opponent, if you have done the defensive build correct. Alright, boys, hope to see you out there in some games, and I hope we can see ourselves some really good Battle for Middle-earth 2 and some really higher skill ceiling as we get into the meta game a little bit. So, best of luck, and I will see you guys out there.